Greetings all. Welcome to another session here of Tuesday Talks. Today we're going to continue our discussions in language curriculum development. In particular, we're going to be talking about selecting and or adopting a textbook for your courses. Now, it may be that you're developing a curriculum. You're going through the scope and you're going through the sequence, and you're wondering, should I select textbooks for the courses that I'm designing? And it may be that you want to, and it may be that you won't. But regardless, we're going to be looking at some of the reasons for selecting a textbook and what to do if you already have one and you don't like it too much. Okay? So let's begin. We're just going to talk real quick about that course book. We'll talk about materials that you may want to use in supplementing it, and then how to evaluate a book. Course books, they remove opportunities and or requirements from the selection process, the sequencing process, in a course, okay? Because they're going to basically have a good deal of the scope and the sequence already laid out for you in the book. So the sequencing is done. The selection of topics is done. You may have assessments that are done because they're already in the book. Okay, so that could be a plus or a minus. It could be a good thing or a bad thing. Additionally, textbooks limit the opportunities for negotiation because you have these materials in the book. And so if you have a textbook and you're not going to be doing negotiation, that might be a good reason to do that. If you like negotiating with your students, that may not be a good thing. Okay? You may want to decide not to use certain parts of the textbook because students aren't interested in it. Course books also have the formatting already laid out for you. Might already have parts of the assessment. Certainly has the sequencing. Those can be pluses and or those can be minuses, depending on your situation. Now, what are some reasons to use a textbook? Well, it may be the state requires that you use the textbook. You don't have a choice. You got to use this book. You're like, okay, Captain, I'll use that book. So you use the book. It may be that you have a teacher that's not experienced. And because that teacher's like, I don't know what I'm doing, then you provide them a book so that they can have that scope and sequence. Materials are already laid out for them. Okay, so you may have an inexperienced teacher. You may also have a teacher who says, this book is awesome. It does the content, it does the 4 strands, it's got assessments. Everything that I want is in this book. Well, great. It'll be a good reason to adopt that book. And of course, it may be that the students want the book because it's fun or it hits topics that they like. And so that might be another reason. Now, if you're going to pick a book, you should be thinking and asking questions. Questions like, what's the content? What are the discussions that are being covered in the book? Okay, what are those materials? What's the language content? Is it going to cover the grammar and vocabulary that my students need? Is it going to cover the speaking and writing skills that my students need? You better be able to find out what those are. You also want to ask how it's presented. Is it presented in such a way that my students are going to enjoy it? Is it a fit for their age? How are they assessed? Is it going to provide a reasonable assessment so that your students will feel confident that they know this material? Something that you want to ask as you go through. Now, if you're going to adapt a course book, all right, if the book is already adopted, well, of course, then there's not much you can do about it, but there are things you can do to modify the book, okay? So they give you a course, they give you a book, this is it. Doesn't mean that you can't augment what materials are being provided, especially if you want to negotiate with your students, especially if you want to provide materials that may be missing or activities that you think are lacking. We're talking about the 4 strands. I always want to have the 4 strands in here. Well, it may be that it only covers 2 or 3 of them. There's not a lot of opportunity for proficiency development because there aren't any activities to do that in the text, or there's no focus on language. Okay, you want to try to adapt things because the parts are missing. Maybe the content doesn't fit the age or the proficiency level of your students. Maybe it's going to take too long. You're not going to get through all this. Maybe it's going to be too short. You're going to need more materials. Maybe you don't have the right content. Students are not interested in learning how to cook, maybe. And that's some of the stuff that's in your book. Well, you modify things as you go there, right? Again, for the negotiation process, as for the designing procedures, if you want to include your students in that, might be a good reason to do supplementing. You may get a book, and they may say, you're stuck with the book? Okay, but I can still negotiate and supplement, add things afterwards. Okay, lastly, it may not fit with the teacher's philosophy for teaching. You may want to have a whole bunch of proficiency development and not a lot of focus on language. Okay, so if that's the philosophy, your book may not fit that. And so you're going to modify what's going on. With regard to adapting the course, there are things that you can do. Obviously, you can add or omit content. You can change the sequence. You can change the formatting. You can change the assessment. Any one of these that you can add or omit. How do you do that? Well, you've got to go out and get materials. You've got to go out and find materials that are on the web. And there are a number of ways to do that. There are a number of places online where you can get materials. So we'll go look at that a little bit later. Okay, you may want to adopt other materials primarily because, again, the text doesn't meet the needs. Having a diverse set of materials is going to increase students' motivation because they're not just using the same. They get to go off and look at different things. Maybe that's going to be a plus for them. Diversity does oftentimes spark interest. Ooh, something new, right? So also allows you to be able to negotiate with the students with regard to content. Okay, and then lastly, you may be thinking, this book doesn't seem to follow what the research is saying with regard to the 4 strands, for example. When I talk about the 4 strands, I'm talking about the 4 strands that most courses, that language courses should include, right? Meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language development, language fluency, and then also a fluency development. So there should be a focus on all 4 of these in the textbooks. If they're not there, well, then you may want to augment. Again, another reason why they may not be following research. And there are textbooks out there that don't. They just follow the same tried and true because they're trying to sell books. Okay, you may also be including digital materials. Yay! And there's a ton of digital materials out there. Encourages autonomous learning because you can show the person, here's a site, go find stuff, and they can go and look for stuff that's interesting to them. More autonomous learning. There are great benefits because you have things in digital form with regard to teaching writing. There are automated writing analyzers out there, automated vocabulary analyzers, tons of listening materials. And then, of course, there are resources for speaking to native speakers online. So there's a lot of stuff that you can get in digital form. Also a great source for authentic content. You go to YouTube and look at hundreds of commercials that are sitting out there. It's authentic content. It's short, and usually it fits in with a high-frequency vocabulary. So it's a great place to get information. Now, I say digital materials, yay! There's a lot of good stuff there. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Simply because all this stuff is available in digital form doesn't mean that you're not going to be using handheld materials, posters, books, notebooks, handouts, that kind of thing. You still want to be able to use those. Okay, don't throw those away, but you want to add to them extra things that you can do. Evaluating a course book. When you go to get a course book, all right, you get this book and they say, okay, you got to use this. Look at it. Evaluate it. Look at for the things like, does it meet the language needs? Okay, if it does, you should have that list of language needs. You should have a list of content needs. Does it match up? Right? Is it expensive? Right? Is it manageable? Is it a tome? Is a thing, this huge thing that students are going to have to carry around, or is it manageable? Is it expensive? If it's expensive, your students may have to pay for it. And that may be a difficult thing for some of your students. So me personally, I want to make it as cheap as possible for my students. I don't like when your students are being forced to buy those materials. If they're online, I may be leaning in that way. Even if I print them out, I'd rather have them free materials, and there's a lot of it online. Next issue is the book in a format that's good for learners. Is it attractive for them? Is it going to help them? Does it include helps? Right? Is it well developed? Does it include, for example, snapshots in the readings? Have you ever seen a textbook where you've got the main material right here, and on the side of it there's a little margin that has like a summary of the whole story? To me, that's a good sign. It's a well-built book. Does it have a glossary? Does it have reading helps? Does it have some vocabulary tips as you're going through it? Say, here's what this type of thing is. Again, a focus on form, a focus on vocabulary as they're going through the process of reading these new materials. Right? Is it have those nice options within the textbook? Is it completable? Are we going to get through this by the end of the semester, or is there going to be extra material they're not going to use, right? Are the activities doable, right? Can they do this, right? Is there a balance between the 4 strands? There are a number of things that you can look at when you're evaluating a book. Me personally, I oftentimes do not choose textbooks. What I do is I'll come to the web and I'll use materials here. And there are tons of places online where you can get materials. This one is by far the most popular. This is Dave's ESL Cafe. I rarely use this site, but it's hugely popular, hugely famous, and there are tons of materials for teachers, for students, for everyone. It is by far one of the oldest and most robust sites where you can get materials and information. So there's one place that you may want to go. A place that I use quite often is the Internet TESOL Journal. This site, there are dozens and hundreds and thousands of materials at your disposal. You've got activities, lessons, techniques, questions, games, jokes, things for teachers, things for students. So there's a ton of stuff here, and I kid you not, a ton of stuff. And everything here is open source. Not open source, what's the word I want? I can't remember what these are called. Creative Commons licenses. So all of this stuff that's here can be used by other people. Come on in and take a peek. This is just a snapshot of some of the things that are available here. Lots and lots of things that can be used and played with for your students. Okay, great site. The ESL Resource Center, materials for a variety of different levels, a variety of different areas. So again, I would say come and play. If you're going to be augmenting a textbook, if you're going to decide, nope, I'm not going to use a textbook, here are places where you can go to collect materials, or at the very least, collect ideas for getting things. So we've got Dave's ESL Cafe, the Internet TESOL Journal, ESL Materials and Resources, ESL Lounge, again, another place to get lessons, lesson plans, and activities for a variety of students and a variety of levels. English Grammar, yay! Another place where you can get materials, you can download materials, you can go and do review things, okay? The ESL Partyland, and this is where there are lessons. Most of these look functional based, but that's okay. ESL Video, place where you can come in and practice with video. What is this one here? Usingenglish.com, another place where you can practice with idioms and the like. This is a reference material. You can go to the ETS site. I've only hit a couple here. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of these sites that are sitting online. Some that are generic, like the ESL TESOL Journal. There are some that are specific, that focus only on vocabulary, or only on reading, or only on writing. And so there are tons of places you can go to augment your curriculum, augment the textbook that you may be electing to use, or that may be forced onto you. And so I do recommend that if you're going to pick a book, first of all, make sure that the book you're picking is well developed, right? It does meet your needs. And also, you may want to look at augmenting it. Or, if you're not going to pick one at all, go out and find materials that you want that are going to fit into the curriculum so that it can be a successful component. Now, I say this as a curriculum developer. I want to have these materials. As a teacher, I may balk at the fact that the curriculum developers are telling me what materials to use. I have the guidelines. You've given me the scope and sequence. Okay, maybe I want to go out and do this myself. If you have teachers like that and you're okay with them going out and doing that, go right ahead. Let them go. Bear in mind that they still should be covering that same scope, and they still should be covering the essential contents of the course, the language content of the course. Maybe even the actual subject content of the courses. If they're in a limited area, if they're in the scope and sequence, they should be able to cover them without necessarily giving them a textbook. That's going to be up to you, the curriculum developers, and the teachers. And that's all I have for today. I do hope this was helpful. If you do have any questions, comments, you can certainly post them below. And if not, I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye now.